Figure it out yourself. 4 words, that's all she said. 4 words to a man whose 82-year-old mother was sitting in a chair, holding her chest, her face the color of old ash, her breathing coming out in short, scared little puffs. 4 words that my wife, the woman I had loved, provided for, and stood beside for 11 years, threw at me like she was swatting a fly. Not even a full sentence, just 4 words, and then she went back to scrolling on her phone like I had asked her something ridiculous, like whether she wanted pineapple on her pizza. I stood there in the kitchen, car keys that weren't mine dangling in my hand, staring at a woman I suddenly didn't recognize. My mother was in the next room, my car was at the mechanic, and the person who was supposed to be my partner in life had just told me that my 82-year-old mother's possible medical emergency was, quote, not my problem. I took a slow breath. I said, okay. Just that. Okay. And I walked away. She had no idea what that okay meant. She thought it meant I was defeated. She thought it meant she had won. She went back to her phone, probably feeling pretty good about herself. She had no way of knowing that okay was the beginning of the end of everything she thought she was entitled to. My name is Daniel Hargrove. I'm 46 years old. I work as a senior civil engineer for a mid-sized infrastructure firm in Columbus, Ohio. I coach Little League on Saturdays. I make a mean pot of chili, and until about 18 months ago, I genuinely believed I had a good marriage. I'm the kind of guy who fixes things, pipes, roads, problems, feelings. I'm not dramatic. I'm not the guy who makes a scene or sends a long, angry text full of typos. I'm the guy who takes a breath, thinks it through, and then does what needs to be done. Which, honestly, is probably why it took me so long to see what was happening right under my own roof. Now, if you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these stories matter, because trust me, by the time this story is over, you're going to want everyone you know to hear it too. So let me back up and tell you how we got here, because nothing this ugly grows overnight. It starts small. It always starts small. I met my wife, Brenda, at a company picnic back in 2013. She was funny, sharp, pretty in a way that felt natural rather than practiced. We dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony in Cincinnati, and for the first few years things were genuinely good. We weren't perfect, nobody is, but we were solid. We talked, we laughed, we built something together. Then her sister moved out of state, and something shifted in Brenda. She got lonelier, I think. And loneliness in some people turns to bitterness if they don't address it. She started pulling away from the things that made her warm. She started finding fault in everything I did. The house wasn't clean enough, even though I was the one cleaning it half the time. I worked too many hours, even though those hours were paying for the house she picked out, the car she drove, and the vacations she planned. I didn't make her feel special enough, she said. And maybe that was fair for a while. I tried. I really tried. But somewhere along the way, tried wasn't the word for what I was doing anymore. I was managing her moods. I was walking on eggshells in my own home. I had started doing that thing where you rehearse what you're going to say before you say it because you don't know which version of your spouse you're coming home to. My mother, Gloria, never liked Brenda. And look, my mother is 82 years old and has opinions about everything from politics to the proper way to fold a towel, so I didn't take her feelings about Brenda too seriously at first. But my mother is also sharp as a tack. She grew up hard, raised 3 kids mostly on her own after my dad passed, worked as a nurse for 31 years, and has a way of reading people that I've never been able to fully explain. She used to say, "Daniel, that woman counts everything you give her and nothing she takes." I'd laugh it off. I'd say, "Mama, stop." She'd give me that look, that slow, patient look that only mothers over 70 can really perfect, and she'd say, "Okay, baby, I'll stop, for now." My mother lived about 20 minutes from us in a small ranch house she owned since 1987. She was independent, stubbornly, fiercely independent. But she was also 82, and 82 comes with a collection of health concerns that don't care how tough you are.
She had some heart irregularities her doctor had been monitoring. Nothing catastrophic, but nothing to ignore either. On a Tuesday evening in March, I got a call from her neighbor, Miss Patrice, a wonderful 67-year-old retired school teacher who kept an eye on my mother in a way I will be grateful for until I die, who told me that my mother had been complaining of chest tightness and her color didn't look right. Miss Patrice wasn't panicking, but she was concerned, and when Miss Patrice is concerned, you pay attention. I hung up and immediately went to look for my car keys, which was when I remembered my car was in the shop. It had been there since Monday for a transmission issue. I had been driving Brenda's old backup car, a little Honda she kept for just-in-case situations all week. I figured this was exactly the kind of just-in-case situation a backup car was designed for.
I found Brenda in the kitchen, sitting at the island, phone in hand, working her way through some reality TV recap she was reading online. I explained the situation as clearly and calmly as I could. My mother, chest tightness, 20 minutes away, my car was in the shop. Could I take her extra car to go check on her and possibly take her to the hospital? She looked up at me. She looked back down at her phone. That's not my problem, Daniel. Figure it out yourself. I want you to understand the silence that followed that sentence. It wasn't a quiet silence. It was the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind where you can feel something cracking somewhere deep in the foundation of a thing. I said, Brenda, my mother might be having a cardiac event. She shrugged, actually shrugged, like I'd told her it was raining outside. She's always got something going on. Call 911 if you're so worried. That's what they're for. Now, 911 was not a bad idea on its own. I want to be fair here. But the reason I didn't immediately call 911 was because my mother, God bless her, has a complicated relationship with ambulances. She had been billed nearly $3,000 for an ambulance ride 2 years prior that her Medicare supplement hadn't fully covered, and she had made me swear on my father's memory that I would not call an ambulance unless she was unconscious. She was scared of the bill more than the hospital. That's what 81 years of careful working-class budgeting does to a person. I respected that. It was her wish. I explained this to Brenda. She didn't look up from her phone. Not my problem, she said again, like saying it twice made it more true. Brenda, I am asking you for your car for 1 hour, maybe 2, to take my elderly mother to see a doctor. My car stays here. I might need it. For what? That's not your concern. I stood there for another moment. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I thought about my mother saying, that woman counts everything you give and nothing she takes. I thought about 11 years. I thought about the chili I made every Sunday. I thought about how many of her bad days I had absorbed without complaint. I thought about a lot of things, very fast, the way you do when something finally becomes completely clear. I said, okay, and I walked out. I called my neighbor Kevin, a good man, a solid man, the kind of neighbor people write country songs about. And he drove me to my mother's house without a single question asked. He just grabbed his keys and said, let's go. Kevin is exactly the kind of person Brenda is not, and the contrast was not lost on me in that moment. My mother was pale and uncomfortable, but stable. We took her to the emergency room where they found she was having a bout of atrial fibrillation, a rhythm problem with the heart, not a full attack, but serious enough that they kept her overnight for monitoring and medication adjustment. She was going to be okay, but she needed to be there. She needed to be seen. If I had listened to Brenda and figured it out myself by doing nothing, my mother might have been in a much worse place by morning. I sat in that hospital waiting room until 1:30 in the morning. Kevin sat with me for the first 2 hours before I made him go home. I drank 3 cups of terrible vending machine coffee, and I thought about my marriage with a kind of cold, clear-eyed focus I hadn't had in years. Not angry thinking, not emotional thinking, the kind of thinking that an engineer does, methodical, structural, looking for the problem at its root. And here's what I found at the root. Brenda had not been my partner for a long time.
She had been a resident of my life. She lived in my home, drove a car that sat in my driveway, enjoyed a standard of living that my salary largely funded, and offered in return a collection of demands, complaints, and cold shoulders. I had been so busy trying to fix the marriage that I hadn't stopped to ask whether the marriage was actually fixable, or whether it even deserved to be. Now, if you've been following along and you're feeling something right now, whether it's anger on my behalf or maybe recognition of something in your own life, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. These stories are real, these feelings are real, and there are a lot more of them where this came from. You don't want to miss what comes next because, trust me, it gets a lot more interesting. I came home at 2 a.m. The house was dark. Brenda was asleep. I didn't wake her. I went to the guest room, lay down on the top of the covers, and stared at the ceiling until my alarm went off at 6. I went to work, I did my job, I ate a sandwich at my desk, and then, on my lunch break, I made a phone call to my attorney. Now, and this is important, I want to be clear that what I did next was not done in anger. I was not hot-headed about this. I was not impulsive. I had, in fact, been thinking about this conversation with my attorney for the better part of 6 months. The incident with my mother in the car did not cause the decision. It was simply the moment that the decision became undeniable. There's a difference. Brenda thought she had all the power in our dynamic. She thought I would always absorb, always adjust, always accommodate. She had no idea that while she was sitting at that kitchen island, scrolling on her phone, refusing to lend a car to a man whose elderly mother might be having a heart attack, she was making the last move in a game she didn't know she was losing. My attorney is a woman named Patricia Voss, sharp, practical, zero nonsense, and when I told her what had happened, there was a pause on the line before she said, "Daniel, I've been waiting for this call." Apparently, that made 2 of us. Here's what Brenda didn't know, because Brenda had never been particularly interested in the details of our finances beyond what appeared in her personal checking account every month.
6 years ago, when my firm had a record year and I received a substantial bonus, I had, on the advice of a financial planner, set up a separate investment portfolio in my name only. This was completely legal, fully disclosed in our tax filings, which Brenda never read, and had grown considerably over time. I also, over the years, had quietly retained ownership of several things Brenda assumed were ours, including the property my mother lived on, which I had purchased in my name with an inheritance from my uncle before Brenda and I were even married. That house had gone up significantly in value. Brenda had no claim to it. Additionally, and here is where it gets interesting, 2 years prior, Brenda had signed a document. She hadn't read it carefully. She had been in a hurry to get to a lunch with her friends, and I had asked her to sign a financial power of attorney document for my mother's care planning. She signed it, but she had also, in the same sitting, signed a post-nuptial agreement that our attorneys had drawn up, which she had glanced at and declared the same boring legal stuff before scrawling her name. It was not the same boring legal stuff. It was a carefully structured agreement that significantly limited her claim on the assets she didn't know existed. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I planned all of this from the beginning. I didn't. I'm an engineer, not a villain. But I am organized, I am thorough, and over the years of watching our marriage erode, I had, carefully and legally, made sure that if things fell apart, they would fall apart in a way that didn't leave me destroyed. Call it instinct, call it preparation, call it 11 years of watching a woman who counted everything you gave and nothing she took. The process began quietly. Patricia started preparing the paperwork. I moved slowly, carefully, making no outward changes to our daily routine. I was still home for dinner. I was still civil. I was not cruel. Brenda, for her part, behaved as though the night of my mother's hospital visit had never happened. No apology, no mention of it. She asked me the next morning if I had remembered to pay the cable bill, and that was the extent of our interaction about the whole event. Let me tell you about the 31 phone calls. It was a Thursday. 11 days after my mother's hospitalization, which my mother, by the way, had made a full recovery from and was back home bossing Miss Patrice around and watching her stories, which made me happier than I can say. I was in a meeting at work when my phone started vibrating against the table. I glanced at it. Brenda. I sent it to voicemail. It vibrated again, and again, and again. By the time my meeting ended 40 minutes later, I had 31 missed calls from my wife. 31. I counted them twice because I thought I was reading it wrong. There were also 14 text messages, escalating in tone from "call me" to "Daniel, where are you?" to "this is an emergency, call me now," to my personal favorite, "I swear to God, Daniel, if you don't answer this phone, I am going to..." And then it just ended there because apparently she ran out of either words or fingers. I stood in the hallway outside the conference room and called her back. She answered on the first ring. "Where have you been?" she screamed, and I mean screamed. My colleague Terry, who was walking past me at that moment, visibly flinched and gave me the look, you know the look, the "buddy, I'm so sorry" look. I kept my voice calm. "I was in a meeting, Brenda. What's going on?" What was going on, it turned out, was that Brenda had been trying to access our joint checking account to make a purchase. I later found out it was for a handbag, retailing at approximately $680, which is a whole separate conversation, and had discovered that the joint checking account had been significantly reduced. Not emptied, that would have been illegal and also just tacky, but reduced. Patricia had advised me to move my personal contribution to that account down to the legally required minimum while the divorce proceedings were being prepared. Brenda's name was on that account too, and her access to it was untouched. She simply found less than she expected. "What happened to the account?" she demanded. "I reallocated some funds," I said. "Reallocated to where?" "To my personal accounts." There was a pause so long I checked to see if the call had dropped. "Your personal accounts," she said, slowly, like she was trying to locate the words in a foreign language. "You have personal accounts?" "Yes, since 2018, roughly. It's all in our tax documents, Brenda, the ones you've never read." Another pause. Shorter this time, because Brenda was fast, I'll give her that. She was fast and she was calculating, and I can almost hear the gears turning through the phone. "Daniel," she said, and her voice dropped to something softer, something I recognized from the early years, something that once upon a time made me feel warm. "Baby, what's going on? Talk to me. Are you okay? Is this about your mom? Because I've been meaning to talk to you about that night. I think I was having a really hard week and "Brenda," I said. "Because you know I love your mother, I do. She just, sometimes I feel like she doesn't respect our..." "Brenda." She stopped. "You're going to receive some paperwork in the next few days," I said. "I'd suggest you read it carefully, unlike the documents from 2 years ago." Silence. "Have a good afternoon," and I hung up. Now, I want to pause right here for a second, because I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be thinking, "Dan, this seems a little cold. This seems calculated." And you're not entirely wrong. But here's the thing about being the person who always absorbs, always adjusts, always accommodates. At some point, the absorption stops. At some point, the thing you've been holding stops being containable. And when that happens, what comes out is not hot and explosive. It's cold and precise. Because that's what happens when a measured person finally measures enough. Brenda tried to reach me 14 more times that afternoon. I answered none of them. She showed up at my office, actually showed up, stood at the reception desk and asked for me, and I had Janet at the front desk tell her I was unavailable. Brenda reportedly stood there for a full 2 minutes before leaving, which Janet described to me later with the kind of barely contained delight that front desk staff reserve for truly memorable moments. And before I tell you what happened next, because what happened next is the part that even I did not see coming, hit that subscribe button for me, would you? Because I want you here for the rest of this. I don't want you missing the part where everything flips, the part where something I thought was just one secret turns out to be hiding a much bigger one.
The paperwork reached Brenda on a Friday morning. Patricia had it delivered by a process server, a very pleasant, professionally dressed young man named Gerald, who Brenda later described to her friend on a phone call I was not present for but heard about through a mutual friend as completely ambushing her at the front door, which is an interesting way to describe a man in a polo shirt handing you a manila envelope. Brenda's first move was to call her sister, who lived in Phoenix and had never particularly been my fan. Her sister's advice, from what I gathered through the various social channels that small communities are made of, was to take him for everything. Solid legal counsel, really, very nuanced. Her second move was to get her own attorney. Her attorney's name was Robert Fells, and Robert Fells was very good at his job. He was the kind of attorney who immediately found the angles, the pressure points, the leverage. He called Patricia within 48 hours and began making noise about the post-nuptial agreement, suggesting it hadn't been properly explained to Brenda before she signed it, that it was possibly coercive, that Brenda had been misled. Patricia, who has been doing this for 23 years, listened to all of this politely, and then sent over the notarized transcript of the signing, the confirmation that Brenda had been offered the opportunity to review it with independent counsel at the time, and the signed acknowledgement form, which Brenda had signed, confirming that she had read and understood the document. Brenda had done none of those things, of course, but she had signed the acknowledgement, and in law, what you sign matters considerably more than what you actually did. Robert Fells went quiet for about a week. During that week, I was staying at my mother's house. My mother, who was back to her full, fiery self, had installed me in my childhood bedroom, complete with a poster of a baseball player I'd liked at age 14 that she had never in 32 years bothered to remove, and was feeding me what I can only describe as aggressively healing quantities of food: pot roast, cornbread, sweet potato pie. The woman was nursing me back to emotional health through sheer carbohydrates, and honestly, I cannot recommend it enough. She didn't say, "I told you so," not even once. That's how I knew she understood how much it hurt. My mother, who has opinions on everything, who has never in her life hesitated to say, "I told you so," just patted my arm every evening and said, "You're going to be fine, Daniel. You were always the strong one." The plot twist came on a Wednesday. I didn't see it coming, not even a little. I've replayed the sequence of events since then, looking for signs I missed, and I found a few, little things that seemed normal in context, but would have been glaring if I'd been paying a different kind of attention. But I wasn't, so I didn't, and then it arrived the way all really significant things arrive, without warning, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. Patricia called me at 3:15 p.m. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard from her before, not quite discomfort, more like she was calibrating how to deliver something and hadn't quite landed on the right approach yet. "Daniel," she said, "Robert Fells reached out this morning with a counteroffer. It's not a standard counteroffer." "Okay," I said, which was apparently becoming my signature response to things. "He's claiming that Brenda has grounds for a larger settlement based on a contribution she made to the marriage that was not financial in nature. He's claiming she supported you through a period of significant career development, and that her domestic contributions directly enabled your professional advancement." "That's a normal argument," I said. "Yes," said Patricia. "The unusual part is the documentation he sent to support it." She paused. "I need you to come into the office." I was in her office by 4 o'clock.
The records Fells had sent showed something neither Patricia nor I had known. 7 years ago, 2 years into our marriage, Brenda had taken out a personal loan for $47,000. She had never told me about it. I had never known it existed. And according to those records, she had used it, or a large portion of it, to make an investment in my company's project. Here's the context. 7 years ago, my firm had been involved in a bidding process for a major state infrastructure contract, a significant, career-defining project. We had come very close to not being awarded that contract because of a shortfall in our preliminary bonding requirements. At the last minute, a private investment through a third-party holding company had plugged the gap. I knew that investment had happened. I had not known who was behind it. I had spent 7 years not knowing that the reason I got the most important project of my career, the project that made me a senior engineer, the project that put my name on the map in our industry, was because my wife had secretly taken out a $47,000 loan and routed it through a holding company to save it. Not for me. I don't think she did it purely for me, but she did it, and she never told me. I sat in Patricia's office for a long time after she showed me those documents. I'm not too proud to tell you that I had to take a few minutes. Not because it changed my fundamental decision. It didn't. It couldn't, not after years of the dynamic we had, not after the night of my mother's hospital visit. But it changed the complexity of things. It made Brenda human in a way I had stopped allowing her to be. She had done something real, something significant, something she had apparently been carrying silently and possibly resentfully for 7 years without ever saying, "Daniel, I did this for you," which, if you think about it, is almost the exact mirror of everything I had done for her that she never acknowledged. We were, it turned out, two people who had both given enormously and communicated almost none of it, who had watched each other's silences and interpreted them as selfishness, and whose marriage had slowly drowned in the gap between what we felt and what we said. That is genuinely sad. I mean it. I'm not being sarcastic when I say that. It is a legitimately sad thing. But, and here is where my mother's phrase about counting comes back, Brenda's $47,000 investment, made 7 years ago and never mentioned, did not cancel out what happened on that Tuesday evening in March. Both things could be true. She had done something good. She had also looked at her husband, who was asking for a car to take his 82-year-old mother to the hospital, and said, "Not my problem." Both of those things were real, and one of them was recent. What happened next surprised Robert Fells, I think. He was expecting me to either fight the investment claim, which would be messy and complicated, or crumble under the weight of it and significantly restructure my position. He was not expecting what Patricia, on my behalf, actually offered: acknowledgement. Full acknowledgement of Brenda's investment, its value, with 7 years of inflation factored in, and a settlement number that accounted for it honestly and fairly. Not generously, fairly. Patricia was very clear on that distinction. We were not giving away the farm, but we were not pretending the investment hadn't happened either. In addition to the settlement, I made one personal request. Not through the attorneys. I wrote Brenda a letter. 2 pages, handwritten. I told her I had learned about the investment. I told her I understood now that she had done something for me that I never knew about, and that I was genuinely sorry I hadn't known, because I would have thanked her. I told her that I was sorry our marriage had become what it had become, not because I was taking responsibility for all of it, but because I believed both of us had failed to say the things that might have changed things. And I told her that the woman who made that investment decision 7 years ago, quietly, secretly, at personal financial risk, was a version of herself she had buried somewhere under years of something I couldn't name, and that I hoped she would find that version of herself again. I did not apologize for the divorce. I did not apologize for the post-nuptial agreement. I did not apologize for walking away. But I apologized for what was mine, and I meant every word of it. Brenda's attorney passed the letter on to her. She did not respond, not in writing, but Patricia told me later that Fells had mentioned, very briefly and without detail, that the letter had changed the tone of things on their end, which, translated from attorney speak, probably meant Brenda cried. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. The settlement was what it was, significant on both sides, structured around what was actually fair given the full picture. And when it was done, Brenda moved to Phoenix to be near her sister. I stayed in Columbus. I kept my job, my reputation, my mother's house, and the investment portfolio. Brenda kept the marital home, her car, and a financial settlement that would give her a solid starting point for whatever came next, if she was smart with it.
My mother threw a small dinner party to celebrate. She invited me, Miss Patrice, my neighbor Kevin and his wife, and my cousin Terrell, who drove up from Dayton specifically for the occasion and brought a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car. My mother made pot roast. She made cornbread. She made a sweet potato pie just for me, with my name actually written in powdered sugar on top of it, which is either deeply touching or mildly unhinged, depending on your perspective. Possibly both. We sat around her kitchen table, the same table I'd eaten at as a child, the same table where she'd helped me with homework and told me stories about my father and lectured me about the importance of choosing people carefully. And we ate good food and laughed a lot. And Miss Patrice told a story about her own first marriage that was so catastrophically funny that Kevin's wife nearly choked on her cornbread. At some point, my mother reached across the table and put her hand on mine. She looked at me for a moment without saying anything, just looked at me, and then she said, "I told you so." I laughed so hard my eyes watered. But here's the part I haven't told you yet, the part that is, arguably, the actual revenge. Not the divorce, not the financial settlement, not the post-nuptial agreement, all of which was simply fair outcomes to a failed situation. The actual, genuine, extraordinarily well-timed revenge came about 8 months after the divorce was finalized, and it came not from anything I planned or arranged or even imagined. It came from my firm. About 3 years before any of this happened, my company had begun the process of restructuring our senior engineering division. Part of that restructuring included the creation of a new position, Regional Director of Infrastructure Development, a role that oversaw multiple state project portfolios and came with a significant salary increase, an equity stake in the firm, and by far the most prestigious title the company had ever created. The search for that position had been going on for over 2 years, both internally and through a national executive search firm. They offered it to me, not because of the divorce, not because of anything personal, because of my professional record, specifically and most prominently because of the state infrastructure contract I had led 7 years ago, the one that had been saved, unknown to me at the time, by $47,000 quietly routed through a holding company by a woman who had 7 years later refused to lend me her car. The irony of that is not lost on me, not even a little bit. I accepted the position. I celebrated quietly. Dinner with my mother and Miss Patrice, nothing elaborate. I stood in my mother's living room with a glass of Terrell's good wine, and I thought about the strange, circular, occasionally cruel logic of how lives unfold. I thought about a woman who had done something remarkable and then buried it. I thought about what might have been different if we had been better at saying the things that mattered. I thought about how sometimes the best revenge isn't the thing you plan, it's the thing that simply happens when you keep going, keep doing your work, keep being the person your name deserves, while someone who underestimated you sits somewhere else, watching from a distance. I heard through mutual channels, not stalking, just the unavoidable osmosis of having been married to someone for 11 years, that Brenda had heard about my promotion. I don't know exactly how she reacted. I can speculate, but I won't. What I will tell you is this. About 2 weeks after the announcement, I received an email, short, 3 sentences. "Congratulations on the promotion. You always deserved it. I'm sorry about your mom." That was it. No request, no angle, no follow-up, just 3 sentences. I read it several times. Then I typed a response, also short. "Thank you. She's doing great. Take care of yourself." And I meant it, every word of that too. My mother is 82 years old. She is fierce and funny and occasionally exhausting in the best possible way. She watches her stories every afternoon, bosses Miss Patrice around with tremendous affection, and calls me every Sunday morning at precisely 7:15 a.m. Not 7, not 7:30, exactly 7:15, for reasons she has never explained and I have never questioned. She is healthy, she is sharp, and she is still, to this day, the best judge of character I have ever known. A few weeks ago, she called me on a Sunday morning, at 7:15 naturally, and we talked for a while about nothing in particular, about the weather, about her neighbor's new dog, about a news story she'd seen. And then she said, out of nowhere like she does, "Daniel, you turned out all right." Coming from Gloria Hargrove, who has exacting standards and a long memory, and has told exactly 2 people in her life that they turned out all right, me and a former coworker who she has described as a fine man for 30 years running, that sentence is roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. I said, I had a good teacher, Mama. She made a dismissive sound that meant she agreed with me but wasn't going to say so. I still coach Little League on Saturdays. I still make a mean pot of chili. I work longer hours now, but I love the work more than I ever have. I have a good apartment, quiet and clean, with a kitchen big enough to cook in, and a guest room my mother threatens to visit indefinitely at least twice a month. I have Kevin and his wife down the street who still invite me for dinner on Fridays. I have Terrell, who drives up from Dayton more often now just because I think he finally has a reason to.
And I have one more thing. Something I didn't expect and wasn't looking for, which is usually how the best things arrive. Her name is Renata. She is a structural engineer at a firm across town. I met her at a professional conference 8 months ago. She is thoughtful and funny in a dry, understated way that takes a minute to catch up with. She reads actual books, physical ones with pages, and has opinions about them that she defends with a calm confidence I find startling in the best way. She asked my opinion about a technical presentation before she asked anything about me personally, which, if you know anything about me by now, you understand was basically the perfect opening move. We have been taking it slow. We both know what slow means when you're in your mid-40s and you've both had your share of things that didn't work. Slow means honest. Slow means no performance. Slow means you have a real conversation about what you want before you're already 3 years in and too tangled to get clear. It means you say the things that matter instead of burying them and hoping the other person figures it out. I'm learning that. I'm getting better at it. My mother has not met Renata yet. I'm not ready for that particular collision of forces, but she knows about her. She found out through the inexplicable intelligence network that mothers over 80 seem to operate about 3 weeks after I started thinking about Renata as someone real rather than someone hypothetical. She called me on a Sunday at 7:15. "I hear there's a woman," she said, by way of hello. "Good morning, Mama." "Is she good?" I thought about it for a second. "Yeah," I said. "I think she might be." There was a pause. Then my mother said something she has said to me exactly twice in my life, both times when she believed it completely. "Good," she said. "Good." And that was enough. That was, I think, more than enough. Because here's what I've figured out, sitting on the other side of all of it. The marriage, the hospital waiting room, the 31 missed calls, the attorney's office, the letter, the dinner table, the promotion, the slow Saturday mornings in my own quiet kitchen. Here's what I've actually figured out. Revenge, real revenge, the kind that lasts and means something, is not a thing you do to someone. It's a thing that happens when you refuse to stay broken. When you take the okay that everyone mistakes for defeat and you turn it into a direction. Brenda said, "Not my problem," and expected me to collapse. Instead, I built something. I took care of my mother. I did my work. I settled what needed settling fairly and with my name intact. I let what was over be over. And then I kept going. I think about those sometimes. Not with satisfaction exactly, more with a kind of clarity. Because those 31 phone calls were the moment she realized something had changed. Something had shifted in a way she couldn't simply demand back into place. That silence from me, my phone sitting face up on the conference table, vibrating itself in frantic circles, that silence was the loudest thing I ever said to her. 31 times she called. Once was all it took for me to know it was over. And that is the story
of how an 82-year-old woman with a heart condition and a stubborn refusal to take ambulances accidentally changed the course of her son's life for the better. How a Tuesday night with no car and no help turned into a Monday morning with a new title and a new direction. How "figure it out yourself" became, against all expectations, some of the best advice I ever received. Figure it out yourself, Daniel. So I did. And that's the end of Daniel's story. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, whether that was anger, relief, or just the quiet satisfaction of watching someone finally choose themselves, then do me a favor and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know who in your life is sitting in a hospital waiting room right now, absorbing more than they should, staying quieter than they deserve to. Before you go, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I genuinely love reading those. And listen, I have to give a special shout out to our viewers coming in from the United States. You all show up every single time, and the support has been unreal. To everyone watching from the Philippines, you are some of the most loyal and loving people in this community, and I see you. To our Canadian viewers, always steady, always here, thank you. And to everyone tuning in from New York specifically, the city that never sleeps, apparently including when dramatic story videos drop at midnight, you already know we appreciate you. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. My mother still thinks I won't make it. Let's keep proving her wrong. Together.